Welcome to Briefing 5 of 6 of the CipherVibe Cybersecurity for Beginners course. Today, we will make securing satellite internet from signal hijacking understandable, practical, and connected to the rest of your learning path. Low Earth orbit systems reduce latency and expand coverage, but their cyber risk is distributed across moving satellites, large terminal populations, remote sites, internet-connected management systems, and complex supply chains. A resilient design assumes radio interference, compromised endpoints, stolen credentials, dependency failure, and degraded connectivity will occur. The purpose of this lesson is not to memorize a collection of terms. It is to build a mental model you can apply when tools, platforms, and threats change. We will define the core ideas, walk through a repeatable defensive workflow, examine mistakes that frequently mislead beginners, design useful safeguards, and finish with a safe portfolio exercise. Throughout the course, remember that security work begins with authorization, scope, and evidence. Use the exercises only on local systems you own or environments you have explicit written permission to assess. Pause when you need to. Write concepts in your own words, record observations, and distinguish what the evidence proves from what you are merely assuming. That habit is more valuable than rushing through another tool demonstration. Start with 4 concepts that provide the vocabulary for securing satellite internet from signal hijacking. First, jamming reduces signal availability, spoofing forges or manipulates signals, interception threatens confidentiality, and unauthorized command paths threaten control and integrity. Second, the system contains space, ground, user, link, cloud, and supply chain segments whose trust boundaries must be assessed together. Third, encryption protects content only when keys, endpoints, authentication, update channels, and management planes remain trustworthy. Fourth, resilience depends on diversity, alternate frequencies, paths, providers, ground sites, navigation sources, and operating modes that do not share one failure. Do not study these as isolated definitions. Ask which asset or business service is involved, where the relevant trust boundary sits, which identity performs the action, and what reliable evidence would show that the control worked. Security reasoning is a chain. Source evidence supports an observation. The observation supports a conclusion. The conclusion informs a proportionate decision. The decision has an owner, an expected result, and a way to verify it. When any link is missing, say so. A professional explanation can include uncertainty without becoming vague. For example, a network record may prove that 2 addresses communicated, but it may not prove which human initiated the action or whether the content was malicious. Use diagrams whenever a relationship is difficult to explain in a sentence. Mark identities, systems, data flows, boundaries, and controls. A simple, accurate diagram is more useful than a crowded picture that implies knowledge you do not have. Now turn the mental model into a repeatable workflow. First, an attacker surveys radio characteristics, exposed management services, vendor portals, remote access paths, default credentials, firmware, and ground station dependencies. Second, the attack may inject interference or false signals, compromise a user terminal, steal operator identity, exploit an Earth station service, or poison a supplier update. Third, the defender correlates radio frequency telemetry, authentication events, command history, network flows, endpoint behavior, location, and configuration changes. Fourth, containment shifts traffic, revokes credentials, isolates terminals or ground systems, changes frequencies or beams, and preserves evidence without losing critical service. Fifth, recovery validates software, keys, command authorization, timing, routing, and attestation before returning the segment to trusted operation. Before acting, define the objective, scope, owner, and success condition. Collect the smallest amount of trustworthy evidence needed to understand the situation. Preserve timestamps and sources so another person can follow your reasoning. Priorities should be explainable. Consider exposure, identity and privilege, sensitive data, business importance, exploit conditions, existing safeguards, reversibility, and confidence. A dramatic label should never replace that analysis. The workflow does not end when a command succeeds, a ticket closes, or a dashboard turns green. Verify the new state with fresh evidence. Check for recurrence and for side effects introduced by the change. Document the result in plain language: what you observed, what you concluded, what you changed, who approved it, what evidence confirms the outcome, and what uncertainty remains. This disciplined loop, observe, interpret, decide, act, verify, and learn, appears in every cybersecurity specialty. Understanding failure modes will protect you from attractive but unreliable shortcuts. First, focusing only on orbiting hardware can leave internet-facing ground services, remote administration, and vendor support paths weak. Second, encrypting traffic after it reaches a compromised terminal or station does not protect plaintext, keys, or control actions at that endpoint. Third, default credentials, outdated firmware, flat station networks, and unmanaged remote access tools create ordinary but powerful intrusion paths. Fourth, radio anomaly alarms without geographic, operational, and cyber context can confuse interference, misconfiguration, congestion, and deliberate attack. Fifth, a backup link that shares the same provider, power, timing, identity, or terrestrial backhaul may fail with the primary path. These mistakes often share one cause: confusing an available signal with a complete explanation. A tool can report a finding, a successful action, or a score while important scope, context, ownership, and verification remain missing. Avoid absolute claims. Words such as secure, compromised, fixed, and compliant require scope and evidence. Prefer precise statements such as, "This control blocked the tested path under these conditions," or "The available records show this identity used the service," but do not identify the human operator. Also resist copying commands without understanding their inputs, outputs, permissions, and side effects. Run one controlled change at a time and record what happened. If an exercise does not behave as expected, that is useful evidence. Stop, inspect the environment, revise the hypothesis, and explain the difference. Good security work is not a performance of certainty, it is careful reasoning under imperfect information. Reliable security uses layers because no single control can prevent every failure. First, encrypt sensitive data before it enters the satellite link and use mutual authentication, protected keys, replay resistance, and tightly governed command authority. Second, apply anti-jam antennas, frequency agility, power control, redundant paths, spectrum monitoring, and anomaly detection appropriate to the service. Third, harden ground stations and terminals with asset inventory, network segmentation, phishing-resistant administration, secure remote access, patching, and application allow listing. Fourth, secure firmware and configuration updates with signed artifacts, rollback protection, provenance checks, staged rollout, and recovery images. Fifth, exercise degraded modes, provider failover, key compromise, false signal detection, station isolation, manual control, and coordinated incident response. For each important risk, ask 5 questions. What makes the event less likely? What evidence would reveal it? Who can contain it? How will trustworthy operation be restored? Who owns the decision and accepts remaining risk? Least privilege applies to people, applications, devices, automation, data stores, and administrators. Access should be scoped, separated, monitored, reviewed, and removed when it is no longer needed. Every important control needs a test strategy. Include representative normal activity, negative cases, misuse, dependency failure, and rollback. A written policy is not evidence that a technical or operational control works. Design for humans. A safeguard that is impossible to use correctly will be bypassed. Provide safe defaults, understandable messages, usable recovery, and clear escalation. Finally, preserve the evidence trail from observation through decision, action, and verification. That history supports investigations, audits, lessons learned, and honest measurement. Turn this briefing into an action plan. First, map the complete service from user terminal through radio, satellite, ground, cloud, identity, and terrestrial dependencies. Second, remove default credentials and exposed management interfaces, then segment operational technology from enterprise and guest networks. Third, deploy correlated radio frequency and cyber monitoring with tested ownership and escalation. Fourth, validate link encryption, key lifecycle, firmware provenance, command authorization, and secure recovery. Fifth, test failover under realistic jamming, ground station compromise, provider outage, and identity loss scenarios. Make the work measurable. Useful indicators for this topic include managed terminals and stations inventoried, phishing-resistant operator accounts, radio anomalies correlated, secure update coverage, and tested failover recovery time. Define the owner, source, review frequency, and limitation for every measure. Do not treat a product purchase or a single patch as completion. Retest the end-to-end trust path, preserve evidence, and track exceptions until the risk is demonstrably reduced. The broader lesson is that modern security failures cross layers: identity, software, infrastructure, hardware, operations, and governance. Defenders need an architecture that remains trustworthy when one layer fails. For the primary source links and chapter markers, open the description. For more evidence-based cybersecurity research, visit CipherVibe.com/news and subscribe to CipherVibe. CipherVibe is operated by CloudSecTech LLC. Copyright 2026. All rights reserved. This briefing is general education. Never test a system without explicit written authorization.